The subject of the daf today needs introduction because we're dealing with Isu v'heter. Isu v'heter, usually studied in a advanced rabbinic school, involved with different category that you combine them together. What do I mean by that? We learned so far the category of kezait, which is a small size half-back. And we have the idea that if the Torah forbids to eat chelev, to eat fat, it's contained as a minimum size. So for example, the Torah said it's a prohibition against eating fat. So if a person ate half of the size of kezait, of the half-back, and half the size of kezait meat, so the question is that mitzaref? Can you combine the two and say that is in violation or not? As a general rule, we say that it's not, we cannot combine them, only in one exception, which is the situation with Nazirite. As you know, the Torah takes our words very seriously. So imagine a person who commit himself not to drink any type of wine. And now we have, for example, bread and wine, and it combines together. So in this case, soon you see how and when and where and what circumstance, but basically this is one of the subject that it's not mitzaref, you cannot combine it. So isur v'heter, meaning something that is forbidden and something that it's allowed, and if you combine them together in some circumstance, when and where and how, you go by the isur or you go by the heter. So that's basically the subject, and we are at the very bottom of page 43b, Tractate Pesachim. 5 lines from the bottom of the page. אמר רבי אבאו, אמר רבי יוחנן, כל האיסורים שבתורה אין היתר מצטרף לאיסור, חוץ מיצורי נזיר, שהרי אמרה תורה, משרת. So, again, we have the prohibition against eating fat, eating meat. Combine the two, we said you cannot combine them both, it's not mitzarfim, but with Nazirite is different. What happened with Nazirite? You take a fellow that he is now in a state of Nazirite, he commit himself not to be involved with any form of wine, grape. That fellow took grape. You take, for example, kezait yain, a olive bark of wine, and now he combined it with a bread. So here you said that on the surface it's not a difference between this and all the others, you just combine them too. But here we said that if it's below than the size of kezait, so we said gzerat hakatuv, that the text tells us that if it's pachot mishiur, if it's less than that size, so we said heter mitzaref leisur, which means if you have originally here we go, and the way I try to explain it's on the machloket of Rashi and Tosfot, and I base that on the study of the famous late Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman. According to Rashi, Rashi tells us that Nazirite, he took a grape and he combined it with the bread. He ate it together. So now he is in violation. It's called avar isur lav. He is in violation of negative commandment. Why? Because the Torah said, "V'chol mishrat anavim lo yochal." He cannot involve in any type of eating grape. So you have half kezait bread, half kezait grape, and the bread is a heter, the grape is a isur, it's prohibited. He combined it, so the bread mitzaref, the heter mitzaref to isur, it's combined the two. That's Rashi view. According to Tosfot, only if the grape combined with the bread, then you say that it's okay. For example, if you take a bread, taval pat beyain, if you take a bread and he dip it with a big jar or big cup of wine, so then heter hitztaref leisur. the prohibited combined with the permissible combined with something that is prohibited. Now, Rabbi Weisblum elaborated on that, and he said, according to Rashi, the same is the entire Torah. The whole idea of forbidden of eating, we have to have a minimum of kezait of the size of olive bark. So therefore, we have some meaning that created a prohibition, which means you violated what the Torah called mishrat anavim. So you have a heter, that is the bread. You have a isur, that is the wine. Heter metzaref leisur, because it's integral part of eating. Now he elaborates Rabbi Weisblum, and he said, when it's come to the Tosfot, so to say that kezait, it's prohibited only if you have, for example, wine and the bread. So then you say that the heter changed to isur, the permissive changed to forbidden. So what Rabbi Yochanan tells us here, he said, heter lo mitzaref leisur. You cannot combine the bread with the wine, excluding the Nazirite that he said, then heter mitzaref leisur. So now we go by Zeiri, and Zeiri amar af seor bal taktiu. So Zeiri said that also involve another important aspect. The Torah tells us that we are not allowed to sacrifice on the altar chametz, leavened bread, and that apply for the entire year around. So therefore, Zeiri comes and tells us, if a person put part of the mincha offering, let's say he put some of matzah and some of chametz, some of leavened bread and some matzah category. So we derive from the previous braita, as we studied in the previous session. So that's come to lerabot, to come to add seor bal taktiru b'ta'arovet. When it's come to a mixture, that's the reason why we said. So the heter, something is permissible, mitztaref le'isu, it's combined with something that is forbidden. Bal taktiru, it's what Rabbi Eliezer said, because keman Rabbi Eliezer the darish kol, because Rabbi Eliezer, what he told us, that because the Torah said, bless you, because the Torah said the term kol, which apply that any mixture that contains any amount of a prohibited substance, it's not nullified. And he derived from what the Torah said, kol machmetzet lo tochelu, that's lerabot ta'arovet chametz, any mixture. So now the Gemara asks, if that's the case. 44, li'inyan chametz bepesach nami. So also in regard to the prohibition, we can juxtapose that point of isur v'heter also to the point of the prohibition of chametz in Pesach, which means the heter can combine with the isur, because in regard to the chametz, the leavened bread, we learn it from the word kol, as we said in the previous page, that according to Rabbi Eliezer, the word kol, it's in addition that all the combination of the mixture of leavened bread, which means when it's come to leavened bread, that it's a heter, it can combine with isur. And therefore the question is, why Zeiri did not mention when it's come to chametz in Passover that the heter can combine with the isur? Why we don't say the same term that we said earlier, that heter can combine in isur, also in regard to chametz bepesach according to Zeiri? So the Gemarrah respond, and they said, Eina chinami, that's it true, that also in regard to 11 of Passover, that heter can combine with the isur. Now, Zeiri also can mention that, v'la'apuke, the reason that Zeiri did not mention that, it's because midei Abaye, because he wants to exclude the opinion of Abaye. The Amar, Abaye tells us, yesh haktara lefachot mikezai. There are obligation of malkot, If a person takes a seor and he put the incense on the altar, even it's below than the size of the olive bark, so that's the idea of heter mitzaref leisur. So kamash melan. So we derive from that the haktara lav lefachot mikezayit. So we derive from that when it's come to taking the incense, all this idea of getting malkot apply also to the size of pachot mikezayit, even below than the size of kezayit. So far, just to make sure that we all understand, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the heter apply for the entire Torah. It's not mitzaref, it's not combined with isur, excluding Nazirite. According to the İngilizce, when they use the term seor, kol seor lo taktiru, it means that heter combined mitzaref in isur. In regards to chametz in Pesach, so far we understand that that's lerabot, to include a situation of ta'arovet, of a mixture, which is, if we have leavened bread, chametz, that they put it ho'ala al gabe hamizbeach, they put it on the altar, according to the İngilizce, if you have a size of kezayit, of an olive bark, that it's also a chametz applicable. However, the İngilizce hold that if it's below than the size of kezayit, so in our simple anthropomorphic language, mizbeach lo ochel, the altar did not consume it, so therefore lo over alav, he is not in a violation of the commandment. So far what we get, yativ Rav Dimi v'kamar lo la'ashmata. So Rav Dimi sat in Beit HaMidrash, in the house of study, and he told, Amen, and he told this halacha of Rabbi Yochanan that heter cannot combine with isur, excluding one avenue, which is the nazir. That's what Rashi said. Omar le'abai le'Rav Dimi v'chi kol isurin shebatorah in heter mitzaref le'isur. Come on, you're going to tell me that all the other prohibition of the Torah you cannot combine isur and heter? Ve'atnan, we learn in a tractate called Tvul Yom in chapter 2. Hamikpah in a simple language, tell me what they said in English, but in Hebrew you call it daisa. It's like what you eat in the morning, what's it called? Porridge. What? Porridge. Okay. Yeah. So you have this porridge, shel truma. It was made out of consecrated item. Vehashum, garlic, vehashemen, oil, that you combine it as an addition to something that is shel chulin, that is non-consecrated offering. Venagat vulyon b'miktzatam. So let's refresh our memories. What is a tvul yom? Remember we studied several times tvul yom? Tvul yom, we have a different dargot, different level of tumah. Tvul yom is what? Sheini letumah. Right. Is the second category of tumah, because what happened with him, he basically needs to wait.
He's already immersed, but he needs to wait until the day is over.
So he's a sheini letumah. So what happened is, if he touch it, pasal et kulan. Why? Because you have this concept of bitul berov, because you have this garlic and oil that is batele daisa. So therefore, if he touch it, if naga, upasal et truma, he make this truma invalid. However, hamikpah shel chulin, vehashum, vehashemen shel truma, ונגע טבוליון במקצתן, לא פסל למקום מגעו בלבד. But if you talk about the thick soup that was prepared with non-sacred produce, and the garlic or the oil, where they touch with the truma, and one who immersed himself during the day touched some of them, he's disqualified only the ingredients in the place that he touched, but not everything else. So what we understand, there is a concept that we need to clarify just to make sure that we all understand each other. The concept of batel berov, and we said it many times, The concept of batel berov, remember we talk about echad b'shishim, we talk about basar b'chalav, remember? So it's also in Isur Heter, there is a concept of batel berov, that it's in our simple language, it was swallowed by the majority. So in that sense, you have here the oil, or you have here the garlic,
which is secondary ingredient.
Secondary. Yeah, so it's batel, it's anal for the daisa. How do you say daisa?
The porridge. I mean, the grain is the primary ingredient. If it's oatmeal or something, it's the oats.
Yep. So when we study it, we ask if you have this situation of the mikpah, that it's made of non-sacred, and the garlic or oil, it's in truma, makom magao amait psula. Why the location that the tvul yom touched is considering invalid? Habat lelehu tvalin berov. That remember that it's this garlic and oil are nullified by the majority. Why? Because what happened is the major portion of the dish is composed of non-sacred produce. So you have the oil or you have the garlic. It's batel. It's swallow in a sense, in proportion to the daisa that it's totally chulin. So they said, "Ve'amar Rabba bar Chana, ma ta'am?" What's the reason for that? Ho'il ve'zar lo ke'alehem. If someone who's not a kohen and that fellow ate this mixture of truma and chulin, he deserved for eating this mixture malkot bichezait. It's enough that he eats an olive bag size that he is basically deserve malkot, which means that truma is not like other prohibition that it's batel barov, that it's basically nullified, annul, whatever you call it, abrogated, swallowed by the majority. Why? Because truma it's biblical, and it's not annulled by the regular rov. Only if you have 100 like that in a state of non-sacred. So therefore, garlic or olives that made out of a sacred item, biblically speaking, it's not nullified by the mixture. So it's still prohibited for people who are not a Kohen to eat by biblical term. And furthermore, since according to the Torah, all this nullification of the garlic and oil, they hold the law of the sacredness upon them. So therefore, if someone who's alien, who's not a Kohen, ate this size of olive from that mikpah, he deserved malkot, and therefore, even if the amount that he ate, it's below than kezait for either garlic or olive of sacred. So therefore, all this idea of touching in that truma, it's applied even a small size of this mixture, because they have this category. It's called shem truma. They have the category of truma on the entire entities. So therefore, the prohibition for someone who's not Kohen, it's applied to any amount, in any size, in anywhere. Hey chedami. So what's the reason that someone who's not a Kohen deserves malkot if he ate kezait from that mikpah? Because he didn't eat something from the truma itself. Lav mishum de heter mitztaref leisur. It is not because that something is permitted substance joined together with prohibited substance. So they said, lo, my kezait. What we said in the size of olive bark in this Mishnah, the ika kezait bichdei achilat pras, which means that you have a size of kezait when of truma in a time to take of the half loaf, which is achilat pras, which we explained many times, that it's in a very short time you eat this size of half loaf of bread. So the person is liable for punishment for eating this kezait, olive bark, as the same as he ate truma. Vechezait bichdei achilat pras deoraita. So now is eating an olive oil at that time to eat a half loaf of bread it's prohibited by Torah, and one is punished with. So he answered, he said, Amar le, he responded to Abaye, Rav Dimi said to him, Ein, yes, it is true that eating a size of kezait apply also in a mixture, and it's biblical. So he said, we said earlier that Rabbanan, the sages, disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, with Babylonian kutach, that it's if a dip that contains flowers on Pesach. Why? They don't learn it from the word kol. So why according to the sages, a person did not deserve malkot if he ate kutach in Pesach, even he ate pras from that. Ela mishum, ela mai. What's the reason? Mishum deheter mitztaref le'isu, because the permit substance joined together with prohibited substance. So they said, sof, eventually, amai pliga Rabbanan oled Rabbi Eliezer bekutach habavli. So why did they disagree with him in kutach habavli? So why did they disagree with him that the heter inside this kutach combined with the bread inside, would combine the both to have this penalty of malkot? Ela anach lekutach habavli. Leave kutach habavli, which is an exception. Why? The led bei kezai bichdei achilat pras. That he said that it's eating that mixture, there is no possibility that one will consume an olive bark of the leaven in the time that it takes to eat a half loaf of bread. It's very unlikely. So they said, that's the way Rav Dimi explained. The kasharef ve'achachale, if he eat the kutach in its pure, so it means that he eat it in unadulterated form. So by swelling the food, so his intention is rendered as something that is irrelevant, and therefore batla da'ateh etzel kol adam, in the opinion of most of the people, because it's not derech achila, people don't eat it. It's like, if you remember yesterday we described chametz nukshe, ra la'achila, ve'im mishtar kashatar ve'achil, but if one dips other food in kutach and eats it, so therefore, lately kezayit bichdei achilat pras, you will not consume an olive bark in the time it takes to eat a half loaf of bread. So because you put a dip, it's amount that you can only use a small amount. So it's not, you don't have a size of olive bark of leavened bread. So now Abaye come back, and he asked, according to Rav Dimi, that said that someone eats a isur that combined with heter within the time of eating a half loaf bread, is biblically speaking he is liable. Why? You have two non-sacred produce, two parts, and I have two non-sacred produce. One non-sacred, and one sacred. And ולפניהם שתי מדוכות. And the front of them there is two mortars. So those machines that you use to grind different spices.
Yeah.
Okay. אחת של חולין ואחת של תרומה. One non-sacred, one sacred. ונפלו אלו לתוך אל, one combined with the others. So he said, מותרים. People are not kohanim can go ahead and use it. Why? שאני אומר תרומה לתוך תרומה נפלה. וחולין לתוך חולין נפלו. That I said that since there is no definitive proof to the contrary, that the truma fell in the truma and the non-sacred fell in the non-sacred produce. So therefore, in that situation, ve'i amar kezayit bichdei achilat pras, and if you say that eating an olive bark of a prohibition substance, it's taken to eat a half loaf of bread is prohibited by Torah law. So he said, Amay amrinan shani umer truma letoch v'chulei. Why I say that a combination of truma and combined with the other truma, because those spices of the sacred truma come to something that is not sacred. You have a size of olive bark for that, and someone who's not a Kohen who eats from that, he is in a biblical violation that deserve a death punishment by heaven. So how you're lenient and hold that those spices do not come inside this big part of non-sacred. So you derive from that even those spices of the sacred combined with that part that it's non-sacred, they carry the title of achilat pras in the size of olive bark, because if you go biblically, that mixture allowed to use by a non-Kohen, unlike the word of Rav Dimi, and it's not prohibited only by the rabbinic decree. So therefore, if you go rabbinic, you can be more lenient. Amar lei, Rav Dimi responded and he said, Anach letrumat Talmid Rabban. So he said it's rabbinic, so you'll be more lenient in that. Eitivei. So if you go biblically, you don't take a truma from those spices. So all the idea of the prohibition for truma to people who are not kohanim, it's rabbinic. So therefore you are lenient. Eitivei. שתי קופות, אחת של חולין ואחת של תרומה, if you have two baskets, one filled with non-sacred produce and the other one filled with תרומה, and ולפניהם שתי שאים, אחת של חולין ואחת של תרומה. They have two vessels, contains each of them se'ah, and one for non-sacred, one tuma. ונפלו אלו לתוך אלו, which means part of that combined with the other, and we don't know which one for what. So he said מותרים, so non-Kohanim can use it. Why? שאני אומר חולין לתוך חולין, נפלו the same logic. And תרומה לתוך תרומה נפלה. Each of them fell the same category. והיא אמרת כזית בכדי אכילת פרס דאורייתא, if you go by the same manners, that eating the olive bark or forbidden food in time that it takes to eat a half loaf of bread is prohibited by Torah law. המאי אמרינן שאני אומר, why do we say the principle, as I say, that non-sacred grain fell into non-sacred grain? Because what happened here? If you tell me that this mixture is prohibited for non-Kohen biblically, that's according to Rav Dimi. So how come you come out and be lenient with something that is uncertain if it's not a violation of Torah law? So it's the Oraita Tosfot here and others ask here a question of the way that you identify this. But anyway, it's a question how you express leniency of something that it's safek isur deoraita, that is uncertain of something that is biblical. Amar le anach letruma bezman ze d'Rabbanan. The same spiel says, leave alone the truma in our days. Soon we have a Beit HaMikdash, so soon will be different. But so far is rabbinic. So what happened is, when the Eretz Israel conquered temporarily by the enemies, so all this idea of sanctity was in a way held in that manner, which means it was a mitzvot atluyot ba'aretz, it was a mitzvot that depend upon the land and its inhabitants. But since it was occupied by the enemies, so this biblical commandment of afrashat trumot u'maasrot, to put a tithe of that, it's hold temporarily until the Mitzvah Hashem, when the Mashiach comes soon and build the third Beit HaMikdash. So at that time it's returned, the kedusha la'atid lavo, the level of sacredness will come back. So the same apply when you're taking a portion for teruma. So this produce doesn't carry the name of truma only by the rabbinic definition. And it's a big discussion if the sanctity of the land is totally null and void at this time, and there are those who said no. So it's a big rival in L'chot Trumot, and it's a Rambam and a Rashba and more have a big discussion if it's still in our days. But since in a general term you hold here that it's rabbinic, so if you are a state of uncertainty and it's a rabbinic, you are more lenient. V'ha mishrat leha chayu de'ata. So does this word soaked come to teach that the mixture are prohibited in that case? We derive from that what we just quote from the book of Numbers, book of Bamidbar, chapter 6. They use the word mishrat, v'chol mishrat hanavim lo yishte. Mishrat meaning soak. So we derive from that word of mishrat, 44b, liten tam ke'ikar, which means, remember we talk many times about taste. You go by the taste. So you in a way hold the essence, it's by the taste. So when you combine, those who are expert in food will tell you, when you combine entities, when you put some dipping or something, you change the taste. So you hold that here the soaked is come to establish the principles that the taste of a forbidden food is like of its substance. So therefore it's like included, meaning Shim Sharan Avim B'mayim. Remember what I told you in the introduction? If a person take a grape and he combined it with water, Veyesh B'hem Tam Shel Yain, but they contain a taste of a wine. So if you have a Nazirite and he is forbidden from any form of drinking wine, right? So therefore Chayav, so he deserves Malkot, even he didn't eat the grape themselves,
right?
But it contained the essence, the taste
of wine.
So Mikan Atadan. So here you can derive a Kal Vachomer that Ta'am, the taste, Chashuv Ke'ikar, it's considered as part of the essence, and therefore it's derived not just here. Remember what I told you in the intro? It's applied also Lekol Torah Kula, for the entire other biblical prohibition, as follows. Uma Nazir. If you tell me about Nazirite, that all those leniency apply to different three things. Number one, Shein Isuro Isur Olam, because the Nazirite is not forever. He is limited, he is circumscribed to a certain time that he expresses clearly at the time that he accepts upon himself to be Nazirite. Point one. Number two, Ve'ein Isuro Isur Ana'ah, which means he is forbidden only by the eating method, but not for deriving benefit, joy from that. Number three, Ve'yesh Heter le'isuro, which means even during that period, that Nazirite can go before either one Yachid Mumche, one expert special, or before the rabbinic court, and they can find a way, Rashi said, that to let him out of that commitment. It is, I wish that it's so simple, because it's a responsa of Kovet Shiurim that he tried to say that we don't want to open the door in such a cases, and it has to be a real exception for that. But still, there is an opportunity. So you have the 3 points here. That is not for the rest of his life. It's not deriving benefit, and he can find a way to get out of this business. But yet, asabo tam ki'ikar. So the Torah make for him, even they develop a taste. It's in a sense the same as essence of itself. Right? Now, kil'ayim, if you have a diverse kind, and diverse kind, for example, when you talk about vineyard, so you have this different produce that was mixed with a vineyard. Mm-hmm. So it's considering a mixture of diverse, and it's prohibited. Even planting it, planting a seed, it's prohibited. That's the Rambam said in L'chot Kilai. So therefore, Kilai, diverse kind, is we treated much more stringent than Nazirite. Yet you see here again, number one, Shisua Isur Olam, that's applied forever. The prohibition against diverse kind. And V'isuro Isur Ana'ah, and it's forbidden to derive benefit from that. And then Heter L'isuro, which means those produce that forbidden because it's a mixture of diverse kind, you cannot go before the expert or before a bedin and abrogated it. So therefore, and no din she'aseh tam ki'ikar, if you tell me if something lenient, so something that is much serious like diverse kind, for sure you said that the taste is considered the same as its essence. Vehu hadin, as a conclusion, the Braita said, that's also apply that you derive the Nazirite prohibition and you juxtapose that to le'orla. That orla, as you know, that is the several years when you reach the years. So he said, bishtaim, you derive from the dat kal vachomer from the other two that we mentioned earlier. So since we have three stringencies that we mentioned earlier, two is the prohibition of orla, that it's much stringent than the Nazirite. And because orla it's much more, so we hold that in such a manner that if you are stringent in Nazirite, you go by the orla as well. So it means that you have here two contradicted Braitot, according to Rabbi Abba, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, because the Braita that derive from the word Mishrat, that we learn that Tam Ki'ikar, that the taste is considered the same as its essence, and we do not derive from that the concept of Heter Mitztaref Le'isu, that something is permissible combined with something is forbidden, and you can combine the two together, and that's basically contradicted to what Rabbi Abba, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, said earlier. So they said, the Gemarrah responded and said, no, Hamani, those Braita that teach us about Mishrat, with the whole concept of Tam Kikar, that the taste is considered as its essence, it's Rabbanani, it's go by the sages, that they disagree with Rabbi Akiva. And they said as follows, Rabbi Yochanan, the Amar, and Rabbi Yochanan derived from the word Mishrat, you derive the whole idea of Heter Mitztaref Le'isur, Ke Rabbi Akiva, that he derived from Mishrat, that the Heter can combine with Isur. Hey Rabbi Akiva, where do you find Rabbi Akiva that hold that way? So he said, if you derive from the Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah in Tractate Nazir, page 34, that said, Itnan, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Nazir sheshara pito beyayin. Rabbi Akiva hold that if you have, as remember the example I gave you earlier, if you have a Nazirite, that he takes his slice of bread and he dip it with the wine, ויש בו כדי לצרף כדי כזית חייב, and if you combine the two in the size of olive bark, he is basically liable. He is liable to malkot for his act of eating. וממאי דבפת ומיין. So Gemarrah rejected that and said, so how do you know that Rabbi Akiva meant as a mountain olive barks taken from the bread with wine together? Dilma, maybe miyain lechudei. He meant that the measure calculated from the wine alone, that combined together with the size of shiur kezait. V'chi teima, and if you tell me miyain lechudei mai lememra, unless you say that the amount is from the wine alone, so what's the purpose of stating this halacha? Hakamashman de af al gav de ta'arovet, that even though that this small back of wine we treated as a ta'arovet, as a mixture, which means that since it's ta'arovet, that the wine is not independable by itself, the way that we said be'ein, but it's combined with the bread together, so the Nazirite is liable for eating it, and therefore we go by different direction. We said a different source in the prohibition of Nazirite, Ela Rabbi Akiva Divraita. The Tanya Rabbi Akiva Omer, that we go by the Rabbi Akiva that said, Nazir sheshara pito be'ayin v'achal kezayim mipatum yayin chayav. If you have a Nazirite that he take a slice of bread and he combined it with wine and he ate from kezayit, in both in the bread and with the wine, which means he take what? Ta'arovet, he take a mixture from the bread and from the wine, then what we said, chayav, is liable. So here you see that according to Rabbi Akiva, if you have a permitted substance that joined together with prohibited substance, so he hold that he is chayav. So they said, Rabbi Akiva, tam keikar menale. So how do Rabbi Akiva derive the whole concept of this principle that the taste is like its substance? where he derived that. So meaning even according, Rashi said, for that idea that heter can combine with isur mitzaref, it's applied only when you carry this taste of something that is prohibited, but not the essence of itself. So like for example, if you have a wine that combined with a grape, that you have the taste of the grape only they become part of the water. So he said yalif, we derive it from juxtaposition to what? Basar bechalav. We derive it from what?
Meat and milk.
From milk and milk. How? So we basically go that if the Torah tells us 3 times lo tevashel gdi b'chalev imo, and is a prohibition principle that meat with milk, so one of them it's applied to what? To cooking. Prohibition of cooking meat with milk. So if you have a taste of the milk absorbed by the meat, so he said lav tama be'almau ve'asur achana meloshna. The mixture is prohibited. So here in the case of other prohibition, it's no different, that you have the same principle. So now do we elaborate on the sages, what the sages meant. So they said mi basar bechalav lo gamrinan de chidushu. We cannot derive from mixture of milk and meat. Why? Because the chidushu, which means that it's something that it's new, which means all the prohibition of mixture of milk and meat is something that it's exceptionally different. It's unique. It's not like all the others, and you cannot compare other prohibition to that one. So therefore, you cannot derive stringencies that apply to milk and meat to others. So the same apply to this stringency when it's come to tam ki'ikar, the taste is like its essence. So we cannot derive mixture of milk and meat that apply to other prohibition as well. Umay chidush. What happened with mixture of milk and meat to others? Ilema de hayle chudei vehayle chudei shari ube'adad asur. If you tell me that each of one of them independently it's okay, but if you combine the both, it's prohibited. Ela the chidush of basar bechalav, of mixture of meat and meat, the taru otrei lei kulei yoma bechalav השרי. So I explain in my book ביאורי כלומר ברש"י על הש"ס. This is a beautiful Rashi. Rashi said תרי שורהו בחלב כל היום שרי, כלומר מותר לשרותו בתוכו, which means that if you the Havamina of before Rashi we don't understand, but in the Maskana, in the conclusion, Rashi said that if you just mashrei, if you just combine this milk without cooking it, it's permissible by Torah law. But the language of the Gemarrah, it's a past tense, which means that the essence of cooking and not the essence of eating pass the process of cooking it. So here we said, so if you go by the Torah, we hold that you can combine this meat and milk just if you left together a full day, okay? So even you have some taste of the milk combined with the meat, but as long as it's bashilei bashule asu, as long as it's not cooked together, so the issue start, let's put it this way, the issue of prohibition start when you cook it and you have in the meat a taste of milk. ורבי עקיבא נמי בשר בחלב ודאי חידושו. So he said also when it's mixing tam ki'ikar, that the taste is like its essence, so that's applied to other prohibition. אלא יליף מגיעולי נוכרים. He derived it from forbidden foods that come from for the better taste expressed is for idolaters or people who eat constantly forbidden food. So when they keep coming back and forth and using that utensils, so for example, the Torah said about the Midianites in the book of Bamidbar, chapter 33, the Torah said, כל הדבר אשר יבוא באש, תעבירו באש ותאר. Anything that comes with fire, you should pass through fire and it's purified, which means any utensils that you cooked, something that the Midianites cook and use fire, which means they use a hot temperature to cook in that utensils, you have to use the same term, which means you use a fire in order that is kebol'o kach polto, meaning, just to refresh our memory, when we have something, and again, that's not applied to porcelain, but if you have an item that you want to kosher it, nowadays, Baruch Hashem, we have the ability. But so basically, you go by the same process, the same way it's absorbed, the same way it's kebol'o kach polto, the same way you use a hot temperature, that it's absorbed within the walls of that utensil without you seeing it. So even you clean it, it's not enough, because you need to use a very hot temperature that it absorb within it. So you need to use the same process of hot temperature to dissolve it outside. So that's derived, the same idea that apply with those ancient utensils that came from the Midianites, and therefore proceeding to passing it to fire, that food that you cook, it's forbidden. In other words, if you did it later, it's good, but those food that cooked before you complete that process of absorption, desorption, so that food is not kosher. So now we said gi'ulei nochrin. Whatever gi'ulei is like mego'al, it's something that is disgusted. So it's come out these things that absorb in that. For example, let's go simple. You go microwave. You cook something in a microwave, and now you want to kosher it. So you take a glass of water, you put a hot temperature, you see the smoke coming outside, and it's fine. But the microwave itself can be clean. All this process, but the cleaning has nothing to do with that. It's the temperature that it's absorbed during that time that need to be dissolved. So he said, what happened? He loved tama be'almao. It's not applied solely to the taste. Why? Because what happened in those vessels, in those utensils that apply to those, let's say, idolaters, it's not just the taste of something prohibited. Ve'asur, even that is forbidden, which means it not necessarily carry a taste. It's just by merely fact that it was used in a Midianite for something that is forbidden, you have to go to that process. Even you can say, oh, come on, I cook there, whatever I cook, it tastes the same. No. So you can juxtapose to our discussion. In any forbidden food, there is no difference, and the same idea is applied. So what do we understand so far? In the Havam, in an early process, what we thought that the essence of the taste is crucial to determine what type of process we need to take. But here we understand that it's not necessarily. You see situations that you need to go to that process regardless to the taste. V'Rabbanan. So if the sages come and tells us the tam ki'ikar, they derive from the word mishra. So the reason is gi'ulei nochrin nami chidushu. They say that even that food that comes from the idolater is also something new. Why? The hakol, that because all the other parts of the Torah noten ta'am livga mutar, the gamrinan minevela vehacha asur. You remember we talk, if someone come with a shaila, with a question, that something it's put on a plate and it's basically needs to they carry the taste of that food. So what do? You do something to that food that ruined the taste. The minute you ruin the taste, then it doesn't carry that category of forbidden. So it's sometimes you need to wait 24 hours. But in that case, it's called tam lebgam. You create some, in our simple way, blemish with that food that is no longer carry that taste. And how we juxtapose that to nevela. Nevela, what does that mean? You derive it from a dead animal. So what happened? You have a dead body of animal that even you can shacht and you can swallow it properly, but now something happened, it's no longer fine. So he said the Torah forbids us to eat it. So even you have a ta'am pagum, which means you have a taste that it's no longer carry the original taste. So here you said vehacha asur, but here in regards to idolaters, some type of food that left from the idolaters, even it carries inside the utensil something that it's already blemished taste, it's not carry the same taste that's original, it's still forbidden. Rabbi Akiva, that said that it's this Giulei Nochrim, it's not a Chidush, he derived כרב חייא ברי דרב הונא דאמר לו אסרה תורה אלא בגדרה בת יומא הילקח לאו נותן טעם לפגמו. Remember what we said, you remember several times, especially David, I must admire him for that. So when it's come to those questions, it was a plate, that it wasn't porcelain, but it's in a hot, and something hot put in it, etc. It's an issue of it's absorbed within the plate. So we said the best way, it's 24 hours. What happened in 24 hours? It lost its taste. Doesn't carry much the previous. Then the process is simple. So it said v'Rabbanan. So how the Rabbanan derive it? Gdera bat yomai lo efshar delo pagma purta. So even the case that the part used on that day, it is impossible that the vessel does not slightly taint the food absorbed in a vessel. So consequently, the halacha of purging vessel of idolaters is indeed a novel case from which principles cannot be derived. So he said, now we go back to our discussion in 43b. In regard, you remember the original discussion if heter combined with isu. How? By the opinion of the sages, we understand what Rabbi Akiva's opinion. What the sages said, Mishrat liten tam kikar, when it's come to Nezirite, that the taste is like its essence. ומכאן אתה דן, we derive from that is קל וחומר לכל איסורים שבתורה, that also by them the taste is like its essence. לרבי עקיבא נמי משרת ליתר מצטרף לאיסור, מכאן אתה דן לכל איסורים שבתורה כולה. So from this principle you derive all that the prohibition in the Torah. So the whole idea that deriving all this idea, it's a challenge to Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said that we don't hold that heter can combine with isu, only apply. Remember, Rabbi Yochanan said only to Nazirite but nothing else. So Rav Ashi responds, Amarle, since Rabbi Yochanan learned Mimishrat in the whole principle of heter mitzaref leisu, so he cannot derive from that all the other kal vachomer to other prohibitions. Why? Because these two principles come as two sentences that derive one principle. Two verses teach the same principle. And remember that's one of the Rabbi Ishmael principles. Nazir, Adamar Nazir, that we said Chatat Maihi, how you explain the sin offering, the Tanya. The Torah said in Vaikra chapter 6, Kol asher gav b'bsara yikdash, anything that attached to its meat become sacred. Yachol afilu lo bal'a, maybe it's not even swallowed from that meat of the sin offering. Talmud lomar b'bsara, which means within its meat. So not just that portion became sacred, achi bala b'basar, until he swallow that part of the sin offering within the meat. Yikdash, that is sanctified, lihiyot kamoda, that part, it become part of its own essence. She'im psulai, that if this sin offering is invalid, for example, if it's past the time of eating and it's become notar, tipasel, it's become invalid, v'inksherai, but if it's kasher, this sin offering, te'achel, you can eat, kechamur sheba, as one of the stringency, v'rabanan nami, maybe we hold that both Nazirite and sin offering in two sentences that derive as one. You need both of them. Rabbi Akiva hold my tzricha. Why we need these two pesukim? If the Torah talk about sin offering, we do not derive from that Nazirite, because the principle is the chulim kodashim lo gamin. Do not derive non-sacred from sacred. The same juxtaposition, because you cannot make stringencies in something that is not sacred from something that's sacred, because this one you hold much stringency than the other, so you cannot make it together as one entity. So the Torah should speak about the Nazirite. So you say that the prohibition of Nazirite can combine and the sin offering can combine with the others. So they said we said that all the prohibition of the Torah we basically derive from the idea of Nazirite, as we said earlier in the previous page. So it means that that's line in the Torah that it speaks about the sin offering, it's look like superfluous, and it's basically like two sentences that come to teach us one principle, so you cannot derive other point from that principle. V'Rabbanan, so the sages, how they explain it, Amrelach, they said, mitzrach tzricha, we need the both sentences. Chatat leheter mitzref leisu. Sin offering, we derive that heter can combine with something that's forbidden, v'cholin mikodashin lo gamar. But non-sacred, we cannot derive from sacred. So, mishrat, in regard to Nazirite, liten tam tikar, to take the essence, the taste as its essence. Umikan, or from the idea of mishrat in Nazir, ata dan lekol haTorah kula, you can derive to the entire Torah. Now, according to Rabbi Akiva, how he drive all of that, he said, Travayu, both psukim, both sentences that speak, one about sin offering and the other one about Nazirite, leheter mitzaref leisu, that heter you can combine with isu, vehavulu, that's both shnei ktuvim bein kechad, there's two sentences that come as one principle, v'chol shnei ktuvim bein kechad melamdim, that's one of the Rabbi Shmuel principle. So you see, as a conclusion, regardless of Chachamim or Rabbi Akiva, we derive tam kikah in all the prohibition of the Torah, but they just learn from different sources, and both hold that if it's come to a sacred, so a heter mitzaref leisu. But if it's chulin, it's a non-sacred, excluding Nazirite, heter is not combined with isu. The only disputation is regard to Nazirite, that if heter combined with isu, and Rabbi Akiva hold that yes, or say said no. So that's basically the explanation of Baal HaMaor here. So you see, Amar Rabba Shel Rav Kahana Hala Ad Tanya. What we'll learn in regard to the prohibition of Nazirite, which is the book of Bamidbar, number chapter 6. They said, Kol Yemen Yisro, all this period of his Nazirite, B'kol asher yaseh migef hayan b'chartzanim v'ad zag lo yochal, forever come out of a vineyard, regardless from the small olive bark, up to the zags, larger one, he cannot eat. Limed al Yisuray Nazrim shem stavim lazeh. We derive from that if you have a small amount, when it's come to Nazirite, you can combine together. So if you take a small part from this and small part from that, you can do what? You can combine them together, and you can deserve malkot for eating them. Now, according to Rabbi Akiva, you ask, Hashto Rabbi Akiva, Isu ve'eter mistarfim, Isu ve'isu mibaya. If you tell me according to Rabbi Akiva, if you have an Isu and heter, you can combine the two. So now you have both Isu, both in the both items are forbidden for Nazirite to eat. And you say that you have an issue of combining the two? Come on! You just told me that Isu ve'eter is okay, so now Isu ve'isu and Nazirite is forbidden. So according to Rabbi Akiva, you don't need this line in the Torah in the first place. So why he needs to say that it's come to two Isurim, it's an issue? So he said, Amarle Rav Kahana responds to Rav Ashi, you have a difference between the two combination here. Why? Isu ve'eter, when it's come to a prohibited and permitted substances, combine only when they are eaten how bevat achat, meaning simultaneously. Isu ve'isu, prohibited and other prohibited substances, joined together even they are eating bazeh achar zeh, one after the others. So if a Nazirite eat half block of olive oil of grape skins and eat half an olive oil of grape seeds, so he's liable according to Rabbi Akiva. Why? Because you have here two entities that mistarfim, that it's combining together. So if you have, for example, bread, and he eat together with a chatzi kezayit of isu with the grape, so basically he deserve malkot only if he ate them together. But if it wasn't together, according to the way they could understand, it's not part of that prohibition. Hanogea bechatat. So this is Rambam, Hilchot Maaseh HaKorbanot, chapter 8. Food or a vessel that touches sin offering and absorbs, soon you see it's not only Beit HaMikdash, soon you see it's applied to others, and absorb its taste, assumes the legal status of sin offering itself. It means that the restrictions that apply to a sin offering with regard to when and where it may be eaten apply to this food or vessel as well. If the sin offering disqualified, these objects are disqualified as well. So what we see from that, for example, if a Nazirite soak his bread in wine and a quarter log of wine, which has the same volume as an olive bark in liquid measurements. So it's absorbed in bread, and if the quarter log of wine can be eaten in less than the time it takes to eat a half loaf of bread, so it's liable for its consumption. That's the Rambam, Ilchot Nezirut, chapter 5. We explain a lot the whole concept of tam pag-aaral, which is, again, it's the same Rambam there. If a mixture of wine and another substance has a taste of wine, this substance is prohibited to a Nazirite as though it were wine. The same principle applies to the food that absorb in the taste of the prohibition item. Now, you ask about modern times. So if you have Truma Bazman Hazeh, the halachot of Truma apply nowadays by rabbinic decree only. By Torah law, these halachot are in effect only in Eretz Israel, and only when the entire Jewish people dwell there. That's Shulchan Aruch Yoreh De'ah 331.